are back on the build phase. I'm Mr. Ben, and today I'm going to do something that I have not done before, and that is create a tier list. Now, I've kind of talked about tier lists, and certainly on the show and within the community, we discuss cards and interactions within the context of a tier list. But what I'm going to do today is I'm going to go through every single giant size issue that the game has had, even the ones that came out before they were called giant size issues, back when they were just 200 card sets, and I'm going to rank them amongst each other. Now, what are the criteria that I'm going to use to do this? Everything. Cards that are important for competitive play, of course, I tend to rate highly because I tend to come at the game from the analysis of competitive play, but I'm also very much a kitchen table player. My game group gets together and literally plays on the kitchen table every week, so I have a lot of fondness for cool combos, interesting cards, as well as just my proclivities as a player. So there is no hard, fast metric to this. This is totally subjective, and this is just my opinions of where I'm ranking these. So there may be boxes that are next to each other in Tier 1, even though they're there for totally different reasons. So I'm allowing all criteria to be used, which may result in kind of a fun, weird tier list. So let's go ahead and dive right into this. I'm going to tackle these in chronological order, so as each set comes out, we're going to place it on the tier list where I personally think it should go. So let's start with Defenders. So Defenders as a box, and some of these earlier boxes are going to have sort of similar issues, is that Super Awesome Games was very timid with the power level. I think they got stung pretty hard with Thanos in that first box, and they really didn't want to let that happen to them again. So a lot of these earlier sets, plus even before they knew they got stung by Thanos, they wanted to go slow. They didn't want to put out a bunch of things that were broken right away. I think Danny referred to it as eating your vegetables once when I was talking to him about how the power level on some of these earlier sets is kind of held back. That being said, this Defenders box has some of the best defensive plot twists that have ever existed in the game to this day. Shock to the System and Super Senses are both found inside the Defenders box, as well as the Luke Cage main character, the Kingpin main character. The Underworld and Defenders teams have been kind of a big deal throughout most of Versus history, and the core establishing elements of those teams come in this Defenders box. So it's really hard to put it anywhere other than Tier 1. A game that has had, or a box that has had this much impact across many different formats throughout the history of the game. Not to mention how excited this set got a lot of people back in the day. But, oh man, remember 7-drop Ghost Rider? When Ghost Rider was like the best 7-drop in the game? Like, that was a big deal. So you gotta put Defenders in Tier 1. Alright, moving on to the second 200 card set that the game ever had, and that is A-Force. Now, anybody who's listened to this show for a while knows that this set in particular has a very fond place in my heart. My firstborn was very much into the Runaways when this came out. Nico Minoru was her favorite character, and Sister Grimm being a playable card within the A-Force box. Not only was it the thing that really got me to go get this box, but this is the box that solidified me as a fan of the new game. I was prepared in every possible way to not like Versus 2 PCG when I first started playing it. Coming from an old Versus background, I had a chip on my shoulder about what happened with that game, and it definitely put me in kind of a hostile place with regard to Versus 2 PCG. A-Force was the set that totally cracked that for me. So I have to, both for how much I love the individual cards in that set. Let's also keep in mind this is the only 200 card box that's ever had a card banned out of it, which is Singularity. And Dark Phoenix came in this box. So both competitively and for me personally, I think A-Force has got to be one of the top Tier 1 giant size issues that the game has ever seen. The next expansion that we're going to look at is Aliens. So I will say, Kane and Call are two of the most important cards in the whole game. Kane in particular facilitates so many different main characters that are extremely superpower heavy that having the ability to burn cards off the top of your deck until you find a location, particularly for those main characters that are like really obsessed with hitting a particular color, like Rogue deck lists with Kane to go fetch her blues and without Kane look very, very different. I would argue that a huge part of the power level of the rogue main character comes off of the back of the formats where you're able to play her and Kane in the same deck. Unfortunately, most of the rest of this box is just power crept out of existence at this point. There is some niche use cases. Cards like Christie are absolutely an answer to something like Outriders. And there are a few other cards in here that are definitely good cards. I'm not saying the box overall. And if you're an Aliens fan and you're just wanting to play Aliens cards against other Aliens cards within the Versus rule set, this box is fantastic. It's excellently balanced to play the Weyland-Yutani Corporation against the Aliens. Where it starts to falter is when you start bumping these characters into supporting characters and main characters that came out of other boxes. And time has really kind of done a little bit of a number on Aliens, and unfortunately, as fond as I am of this set, I do feel like I have to put it into Tier 3 when it's compared to the other expansions within the Giant Size versus history. So, moving on to Legacy. Alright, if you weren't around when Legacy came out, and in the drought in between Aliens and when Legacy came out, and it was a long time. Aliens came out at Gen Con. Legacy, I don't remember what the original date when it was supposed to come out, but I think it got pushed all the way until May of the following year. So this was a massive drought for Versus cards. And this box came out like it was shot out of a cannon. First introduction of level 3 main characters. First introduction of loyalty plot twists. Numerous staple cards that have made a massive impact on the game for years to come. Most of the Black Widow machine gun combo came in this box. You had Peggy Carter as well as Nightmare. You got your Jessica Jones. You got your Taskmaster. You got all these cards that really matter and affected the game. And not only that, outside of just the mechanical impact, you got Thor. How could I, and Mystique. So 2/3 of the big three, back when we were in the big three meta, came out of this Legacy box. The reality shift plot twist for Defenders is arguably what made Luke Cage as relevant as he was. This box, injecting this into the competitive scene, revitalized Versus when it was at a precarious point where the fan base started to feel like it was splintering, kind of starting to fall apart. Like, what's going on? We have this terrible Thanos main character that hasn't been addressed. What's up with that? And this box came out with a new Thanos, a new Cosmo. Is this when they nerfed Singularity? No, I think Singularity was later. As well as introducing all these really exciting new cards that were expansions to the teams that we already had. Most of the time when you get a new box, you're getting new teams, and that's cool. But this box, fixing some of the problems, shoring up the boat, plugging leaks, additional metaphors, coming out when it came out, was such a big deal. It really, I feel like it could have saved the game. And you're going to hear me say that a couple times with a few of these different expansions that came out at times where the game was on shaky legs and really just injected the community with excitement. And in case you can't tell, let's go ahead. This is another Tier 1 expansion. So each one of these 200 card boxes with the initial Marvel run, I realize it's silly to do a tier list and then put everything in Tier 1, but, like, this is my favorite game, so, you know. Next up, Predators. So Predators kind of an interesting set in that, again, much like with Aliens, this is a set that plays really well against each other. If you're a fan of Predators and you want to play with Predators in the Marvel, or in the Versus ecosystem with that rule set, this box is excellent for that. Now, where it has some issues is it doesn't, in my opinion, feel like a lot of the cards are well balanced, generally speaking. What we have is kind of a mixed bag of cards that are crazy powerful. Things like Primeval Hunter, a 2-drop that almost pushes most of the 3-drops in the game out of the realm of playability. That's maybe a little strong, but an incredibly powerful 2-drop. You've got Jungle Hunter, maybe the most broken 7-drop this game has ever seen. You've got the Prey plot twist suite with things like Death Trap that you can play from your row. So unique mechanics, really powerful equipment, really strong characters. And then you have these kind of alongside really... Oh, how could I forget Dutch? The core part of my Runaway Chopper combo. So again, there's a lot of high points in this set, but there's also a lot of low points. There's a lot of cards that just don't feel like they do that much. A lot of the prey curve is kind of weak, and I guess maybe that's offset by the fact that they have such powerful equipment and plot twists, but generally speaking, if you've got really, really highs and you've got really, really lows, that's going to result in your set landing somewhere kind of in the middle. And for me, that's where Predator lands. Now, if you're going purely from a competitive analysis, I can see somebody saying, well, just ignore the cards that aren't that good and just focus on how good the good stuff is. And there's certainly an argument that cards like Jungle Hunter are so good that it makes up for some of this other stuff, and that could be an argument to push this box up another tier. But in my opinion, I'm going to put this below something like Legacy or A-Force, even with how power crept some of the cards in like Defenders or A-Force have ultimately become. Shield versus Hydra. Talk about another set that's got some highs and some lows. So this is the set that introduced us to things like the Nullifier, both the Good and the Evil book, while the Book of Ashanti has seen some kind of fringe play over the years. The Darkhold didn't really see that much play until the Darkhold Out of Time combo started to exist. But nonetheless, it's a card that was around. The Hydra team, while it did produce at least a couple of powerful tournament finishes with some of their main characters, both Madam Hydra and Red Skull have been played to very strong finishes, as well as the Black Widow that came packaged in here, which has also played to some very good tournament finishes. The jewel of this box is the agent keyword, which is one of my favorite keywords ever in the game. For those that come from a Magic the Gathering background, more recently than my Magic the Gathering background, this mechanic was eventually called Scry within MTG, and the ability to stack your deck and establish your combo cards, dig for the things that you need. I just love it. It is, as I've said, probably my favorite keyword mechanic in the entire game. That said, I have to look at the box as a whole, and while there are things about it that I truly, truly love, there's a lot of cards in this box that are just not very good. They're not super playable. Nullifier has certainly been the source of a lot of energy in the tournament scene and within the rules curation of the game. And it's really hard for me to drop Shield versus Hydra below some of these other boxes when I just love it so dearly. I love Agent. This is one of my personal favorite boxes, but in terms of its overall impact on the game, in terms of its overall competitive viability, I feel like it gets edged out by some of these other boxes. Moving on to MCU Battles. So this box is so important to Versus history. This was the introduction of the photographic universe, the whole universe split that kind of set the community on fire for a while. Probably could have been rolled out a little bit better. But overall, I think eventually people kind of got used to the idea of it and got over the idea of the universe split. What do we think now? Is it fun having our card pool divided into two different universes? There's things I like and things I don't like. I remember really being kind of hostile to the idea when it was initially rolled out, but getting kind of won over by it relatively quickly, or maybe won over is too strong. I reached a place where I was willing to go on the ride with Super Awesome Games and see where they wanted to take us. Even if I had some skepticism with regard to how it was going to work overall, I do think ultimately it more or less worked out. And MCU Battles marking sort of the entry of the photographic cards into the Versus universe is a really important part of Versus history. Now, the drawback here is most of the coolest stuff in photographic did not come in this first box. We did get a Captain America main character. I know Bert piloted him to some amount of success, as well as I think some other players have played it. And if you ignore his alt-win condition, sure, that Captain America has some legs, but it's still not the Captain America I was hoping for. Overall, this box is really important in regard to Versus history, but it is not. I think I gotta knock it down to a tier 2 set. Next up, Buffy Battles. So I came at Buffy Battles about as hostile to the expansion as a person could be. I'm not a fan of Buffy, the show. not necessarily hostile to it, but just not interested. Not a fan. I've seen it. I've watched episodes. I have friends who really like it, and that's cool. I've watched it with them, but it was not a property that I was excited to have come to the game. It was way past its prime. Then I got the cards. And Buffy, our first one-man, I guess one-woman army-style character where she's got a built-in ability to search for herself or ready herself. Versatile plot twists, both versions of Willow that focus on playing plot twists and drawing cards. The vampire mechanic, the slayer mechanic. There was so much going on in this little box that it absolutely won me over. And it kind of maybe marks a turning point where I started to get the point that it doesn't matter what the pictures are on the cards. Super Awesome Games is going to figure out how to make them cool, how to make them fun, and this has ultimately ended up being one of my all-time favorite expansions that they've ever put out. Utopia Battles. So this expansion, the problem with Utopia Battles is that Rogue isn't in it, and Mimic isn't in it. So the two kind of biggest, most signature cards in these two teams don't exist within the core box. There are some cool stuff in here. This was the expansion where we were introduced to machines as equipment that we could play out to the board. Dark Beast does some really fun, cool stuff. Domino, Match, these are staple cards that are really important in the competitive scene. So there are some high points in this box, but it's a little weird that the signature main characters, because they came out in the other expansions, they're not in this box. I feel like that has to bump this down to a lower tier. X-Files. So, Lone Gunman, ridiculous. Monster of the Week has some kind of fun stuff going on with it as well, although their low curve is a little... Monster of the Week is another team kind of like Prey, where they have these awesome plot twists and these awesome things that you can do, but then you have to play Monsters of the Week in your deck. And a lot of them are just not that great, especially the lower cost ones that you would use to activate plot twists. Syndicate is almost... I just don't play much Syndicate. I'm just not that impressed with that team overall. But the Bureau makes up for that in spades. The Fox Mulder 7-drop is excellent. The Dana Scully 3-drop is a great utility card. And of course, the crown jewel of the box is the Lone Gunman. We should probably also mention that this is the box Parallel Dimension comes from, which interacts with the main character from the Buffy box and creates one of the least fun, least interactive combos ever in the history of the game. Overall, I think X-Files earns its place as a solid Tier 2 set. There's stuff in there that's really cool, and there's stuff in there that kind of falls flat. Moving on to Fantastic Battles. So Fantastic Battles, man, this was a set that we were kind of sold as a jumping on point for new players, and it's just not that. It just isn't. There's cards in here that reference Galactus. There's no Galactus in the box. There's cards in here that need Earth and Space locations. There's no Earth and Space locations in the box. There are, however, mostly all playable main characters. The only main character that came in this box that really just flat out doesn't work is The Thing, and his supporting character, I actually thought The Thing was going to be better than Mr. Fantastic when these cards were previewed. That was not correct. And Thing's his supporting character, the 6-drop, is so good that it's a little hard to be upset that the main character isn't also fantastic. Overall, and Wyatt Wingfoot. Let's not forget Wyatt Wingfoot is in this box, as well as Herbie, which is another really important competitive tool. Overall, getting Fantastic Four, Doctor Doom in the game was so important, not just for competitive players, but that kitchen table crowd that really wants to be able to play with their favorite Marvel heroes. This box makes a really big impact when it came out, although you have to acknowledge that it didn't quite hit the mark as being the new player-friendly experience that we wanted. So if we look back over some of these, we've got Legacy, which was kind of, the game was on shaky legs. It came out and kind of saved it. We've got MCU, which was a set that came out and the game was like, the card pool was getting too bloated. We needed to figure out something to do to make it accessible to new players. MCU Battles comes out. Then we have, these big important properties, Fantastic Four, Doctor Doom, Fantastic Battles. So we've had a few of these sets that have been kind of released with the idea of being jumping on points for new players. And they had a varying degree of success. The number one, the best jumping on point, the most impactful 200 card box to get new players into the game has to be the Civil War Battles, and I'm not even going to move it. It's going to stay right there in Tier 1. I realize having mostly Tier 1 expansions means I'm a fanboy, but if you're listening to this, you probably know that I'm a fanboy of Versus. So to break down Civil War Battles, the stated aim of making an expansion that's accessible to new players was absolutely hit, and it was hit dead on. Yes, there's some weak main characters in this box. Black Panther, She-Hulk, even Black Widow to a degree. These characters have problems. They're difficult to play, and they're maybe not the most player-friendly, like new player-friendly type of experiences, but that's made up for 10 times over by making Captain America and Iron Man new player-friendly, almost plug-in, just, oh, I got this box, let's play. And you feel powerful, you feel strong when you're playing with these main characters. Not to mention both versions of Spider-Man. Well, one's significantly better than the other, but they're both playable, sort of. As well as the plot twist kit, the equipments that come in here. This is a great box for competitive players as well as new players, and I think Super Awesome Games really nailed it with that one. So overall, looking at all the giant size issues that have ever released for Versus, you can see I love more of them than I like, and there's only one that I feel like time really wasn't that kind to, and there's none that I put in the dumpster tier. So, if you want to accuse me of being too much of a fanboy and liking too many of these sets too much, that is fair criticism, and I anxiously await your tier list, maybe in the comments below. Go win some games.